All right. So good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. We have to say now because now we're all virtual. So wherever you are coming from, thank you for taking the time to spend with us at our March IEEE Vehicle Technology Society Chicago chapter meeting. Tonight, so in Chicago at 6 o'clock, so we say tonight then, we have Professor Alex Wyglinski from Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and he will be talking about Bumblebee-inspired connected vehicles. What's all the buzz about? So a little bit about IEEE Vehicle Technology Society Chicago chapter. So if you're familiar with IEEE has many different organizations or so for different types of topics, and one of the ones is IEEE Vehicle Technology Society, and so we are the Chicago chapter of that, and we have a website IEEEchicago.org/VT, so you'll be able to see our previous talks, our upcoming talks, and other information regarding about VTS Chicago. If you want to know more about the National VTS Society, you can go to vtsociety.org. So I am the chair. My name is Alvin Chin. I work at the BMW Tech Office USA as an AI emerging technology researcher by day. And my email address is alvin.chin@IEEE.org if you have any questions or any type of comments regarding about tonight's webinar. And my website is alvinychin.com if you want to have more information about additional stuff of what I do besides IEEE. And our vice chair is Kevin Studenberg, who's in the panelist there. And he is a researcher at Argonne National Laboratory. There he is. Hi, Kevin. So we've had previous talks also at Argonne when we were actually in person. And so, yeah, we thank Argonne for their support of VTS Chicago. We also have a IEEE Young Professionals VTS student chair. Yes, he's on the call here, Juro Chen. So maybe Juro, if you can maybe open your camera so we can see you. Okay, let's see if I can. Okay, but anyway, yeah, so he is our student chair, and he is from IIT. There he is. He's in space right now. Okay, great. So the VTS Chicago, basically our mission is to create a community of academics and professionals that are interested in all things about technology and engineering in the vehicle, to create connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles. So the topics that we talk about in our meetings, our webinars, are vehicle ad hoc networks, 5G, autonomous connected electric vehicles, vehicular network, vehicular cloud, connected vehicle platforms, smart cities, power, charging, etc. So anything to do with vehicles, we will talk about that. And if you want to become an IEEE VTS member, you can go to vtsociety.org/engage/membership. There's lots of good resources. You can get access to the VTS magazine, the Vehicle Technology magazine, also the Transactions on Vehicle Technology papers, and you also can get a discount for VTS sponsored conferences. And we're also on social media, so you can find us there. So on Facebook, IEEE VTS Chicago, LinkedIn, Twitter, and we also have our YouTube channel finally. So if you go to bit.ly/IEEE VTS CHI YouTube and you subscribe to our channel, you will see our existing past webinars and meetings there. And this one here that is being recorded this evening will be posted there too as well. Okay. And yes, the next thing is about the Vehicle Technology Conference. So VTS is the sponsor for this conference. So this is the major conference for VTS. And it's really interesting because this conference actually happens twice per year. So normally conferences are only once per year. This conference happens twice per year. So there's a spring conference and there is a fall conference. And of course, since last year from the pandemic and this year as well, everything is virtual. So the spring virtual conference is April 25th to 28th. Registration is now open. So if you want to attend those particular talks, we have some very good keynotes that are speakers. You can go to that URL there and you can register there. And then there is the fall version of the conference, which happens, it's going to happen in September 27th to 30th. And for this one, if you want to submit a paper, if you have an interesting work, you want to submit a paper, originally it was supposed to be due this past Monday, but I just found out that they have extended the deadline to April 12th. So if you have any interesting work you want to publish, I would strongly recommend to publish there, as you still have some time to work on it. All right. And the reason why you're all here tonight is for our guest speaker, Alex Wyglinski. So a little bit about him before he starts giving his talk. He is a full professor of electrical and computer engineering and full professor of robotics engineering at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. He's also a director of the Wireless Innovation Lab there. He was the past president of IEEE Vehicle Technology Society from January 2018 and December to 2019. And actually, I met Alex in person in 2018 when we had the fall VTC conference in Chicago. Right, Alex?
You were really quite dynamic. You were quite dynamic
in person or so.
Yep.
Thank you. So anyway, since then, we haven't really met in person, all virtually, all Zoom meetings or so. Also as well, he is the vice chair of the IEEE standards on vehicular technology and automated vehicles. So there are standards in vehicle technology. This is one of the standards, and if you're interested in joining or wanting to know more information about that, you can email me or Alex. I'm the secretary, so I participate on this association too as well. Alex is also a very prolific writer. He's published over 45 journal papers, 90 conference papers. Oh, I spelled papers wrong there. 9 book chapters and 3 textbooks. He's an IEEE senior member, and his email is alexw@wpi.edu if you want to get in contact with him. So Alex, I think that's what I have to say about you. So now you go ahead and the stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Alvin. Thank you so much.
Oops, sorry, didn't want to do that.
oh, that's okay. There we go. So let me put into full screen mode.
You can share now. Yeah.
Okay. So can you see? Is it visible now?
Yep, we can see.
Okay. Excellent. So thank you, everyone, for joining, this meeting tonight, or this morning, or this afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in, anywhere around the world. Thank you for coming. Also, thank you to Alvin, to Kevin, to Ziru, and the rest of VTS Chicago for this kind invitation to present. I'm really honored to be here. And kind of talk a little bit about some of the work that I do in the area of connected vehicles. As Alvin mentioned, I'm a faculty member at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts. So we're about an hour drive west of Boston. So if you ever have a chance to check out central Massachusetts, we're not that far away. So you just have to land in Logan and just go on the Mass Pike West about an hour and you're right there. So what I'll talk about today is about some of the work that my graduate students and I have been doing over the past several years with respect to connected vehicles, right? So right now, what you see in the landscape is there's an increasing amount of intelligence and automation and connectivity and embedded computing in vehicle technology, right? And there's a number of reasons, okay? One of the most important ones is actually safety, all right? well, sorry, I think the chat popped up as well, and I can't see the chat. So, so as a result, like there's a lot of innovation that's going on. And of course, what better place to see a lot of that innovation from folks in the community like myself, like Alvin, and many other folks is the Vehicular Technology Society of the IEEE. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about in particular is this thing called Bumblebee-inspired connected vehicles. So I'm going to continue that mystery just a little bit longer until surprise, this is where this name comes from. So before I continue, this work, okay, would not have been possible without the generous support of the National Science Foundation, okay, both from, from the CNS and Cyber Physical Systems groups at the NSF, as well as the MathWorks, okay, the people that bring you MATLAB, and the Toyota Info Technology Center USA. All right. So, without their financial and technical support, a lot of this work would not have materialized. But thanks to them, we were able to produce what we hope will be new knowledge that will help sort of push the state of the art of connected vehicle technology for years to come. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to quickly talk about my lab. I usually ramble, so I'm going to try and stay focused and describe what the heck is WiLab, right? What is the Wireless Innovation Lab? Like, where's Worcester, right? I already described where Worcester is, so WiLab is located in Worcester at WPI. Why do we need vehicular connectivity? And what's this thing about vehicular spectrum scarcity and VDSA, vehicular dynamic spectrum access? Then, I'll talk about Bumblebee foraging. And it's like, huh? Wait, what's that? So you know how in the summertime you see those bumblebees and they're visiting flower after flower after flower after flower? They're not doing that randomly, okay? Bumblebees, okay, even though maybe the brain is not as sophisticated as that of a human being or anything like that, it's a relatively small animal with a small brain, but they are doing decision making, right? And not only that, they're doing decision making that has been optimized over millions of years, okay? That is specifically tailored, like first and foremost for the species survival. And what is it optimized to do? Gather food, okay? And I'll show how taking that sort of structure, okay, that decision-making process that has been optimized in a Darwinian sense, how it can be applied to accessing wireless spectrum to support vehicle-to-vehicle communications. I'll then talk a little bit about vehicular beamforming. Okay, it's a tangential topic, but it could play a very important part to further the access to wireless spectrum on the road. And then we'll talk about vehicular platooning. Okay, so WiLab, that's my shorthand for Wireless Innovation Laboratory. Okay, so the WiLab is people. Okay, the WiLab consists of graduate students, undergraduate students, visiting researchers, and myself. Okay, and collaborators coming together to push the state of the art in terms of wireless technology, okay, information technology. And very importantly, not only fundamental theoretical research, but also applied research, okay? Because doing theory is not fun alone. You got to have theory and you got to have practice. In fact, that is the motto of WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute. It's the third oldest polytechnic in the United States, okay? And their motto, oh, it's cool, it's in German, Lehr und Kunst, which is through theory and practice, more or less. That's a rough translation, okay? So my lab encapsulates that. And what we try and do is we teach, okay? The next generation of people who do technology, especially in the wireless world, do fundamental and applied research and take on challenges that are very, very relevant to today's society and our nation. Okay, our core competencies, we do 5G, we do satellite and space communications, we do machine learning for cognitive radio. Oh, I love cognitive radio. I even published a book on cognitive radio some time ago. I forgot when, and connected autonomous vehicles and something called software-defined radio prototyping. That is my main tool, okay, in my tool chest in order to take theory, some theoretical concept of wireless connectivity and translate it into a proof of concept on the road, like the bottom left-hand little box there. Those cars that are driving along, those are my grad students and I driving along I-190 in central Massachusetts. And we have a bunch of these boxes implementing a vehicle-to-vehicle wireless protocol, custom built. in order to test a few ideas out about, like in this case, it was multi-hop wireless communications through vehicles, okay? We actually published a paper that in 2011. It was kind of cool. As for me, okay, full professor, not half professor, full professor of electrical engineering and robotics engineering. I advise a lot, maybe too many Ph.D. students and some MS students. I'm a past president of the Vehicular Technology Society. It was a wonderful experience, being at the service of all VTS members worldwide. I also have a lot of collaborations with folks like the MITRE Corporation, which is located in Bedford, Massachusetts. And I have my own little event that I run year to year called the New England Workshop on Software-Defined Radio. It's really cool, newsdr.org. And what this event does is brings together people who love software-defined radio, who love prototyping wireless stuff, and get together and exchange ideas on how to make even more cool stuff out of software-defined radio. Oh yeah, and I also write textbooks because I just have a lot of time. And the textbook on the right is teaching undergraduate students how to learn communications through software-defined radio. And in particular, that was a very interesting experience this past year, teaching that online, okay? I have stories to tell, best practices on how to make that work, and it's really neat. So enough about that. Why vehicular connectivity, okay? Why? Okay, so first of all, it really comes out of there's a number of stars that are coming into alignment, right? If you take your favorite superhero movie, right? And there's probably a superhero film where some collection of celestial bodies come into alignment once every several millennia and stuff, and it then creates some unnatural power that some villain is trying to take, but then the heroes are trying to stop them and stuff. This, okay, in terms of vehicular technology, is very similar to that celestial alignment, except that there are no supervillains involved, okay? What happens is we have this alignment of several kind of critical technologies that are all kind of like, oh, wow, this is eerie. They're all kind of like complementary to each other, right? So this self-driving car idea, the premise behind the self-driving car has actually been around since the 1920s or something. Check it out. Like there's something called phantom car, okay? And then, progressively people have been trying to look at how you make cars drive on their own. A lot of them were like remote controlled cars. Then folks began using basic sensors, like radar and such. And then all of a sudden, you begin having these factors, like sensing technology became quite mature, right? Like vision processing systems and classification systems saying, that's a dog, that's a person, that's a stop sign, right? You have radar that's quite mature, okay? And more compact and more accurate. Especially like phased array radar now that it's inexpensive to produce. You put it in the bumper as an array and it could have great resolution figuring out what the heck is in front of you and behind you. And now this other emerging technology called LiDAR, okay? And we see here on this Google car, you see that little black thing on top, that black dome is a LiDAR, okay? And that also provides some really great, oops, overshot a little bit, great sensing modality in terms of collecting information of the surroundings of the vehicle. So rule number one about self-driving cars is you have to have complete or really good, okay, and that's variable, depends what your threshold for real good is, situational awareness. Where's the car in front of you, behind you, side of you, on the other side of you? Is there a stop sign? Is it going to rain? Is there black ice underneath my wheels, right? Fog coming up? Is the light going to turn from green to red anytime soon? Is that car going to run the red light over there? Like that type of situational awareness, okay? And so the sensing technologies, everyone's saying, wow, it's reached a level of maturity that begins to give us pretty good situational awareness. Then you have embedded technologies, right? Like all through the car, hundreds of these embedded processors. Hundreds, maybe that's a bit exaggerated, but like 150-ish, okay? And part of it is like, not just for sensors, but like power steering, power windows, fuel injection, automatic transmission, and more of these automatic features. And they're all interconnected together, either through a CAN bus or vehicular Ethernet or something. So now you have a network of small computers all acting in concert on your vehicle. Oh, by the way, now I have the sensing information that gives me additional information about everything around me so my car can act appropriately, potentially without the human driving it. Okay? They just say, okay, I'm going to cross my hands and I'm going to let the car do its thing. And then suppose also, let's say the acceleration is also controlled by a computer or two, like an embedded processor. So you begin getting some really good opportunities here in terms of the vehicle to drive itself. And you might say, again, like, why, right? And safety's one, right? Because like a good number, a very large number of car accidents and stuff, especially ones that result in fatalities, are caused by human error. I wasn't paying attention when that person came out. I looked up and the car suddenly stopped in front of me. I wasn't expecting it, right? Or that car ran a red light and I didn't see it, right? And what happens is if you got enough situational awareness information around the self-driving car, it's going to go into an algorithm. It says, okay, you need to stop now. This is how you stop with what speed in order to avoid collision with that guy, because that's the trajectory that that individual is going when they're going through that red light. Okay. And so this diagram here kind of gives a little bit of perspective of that situational awareness aura around the vehicle, right? Like on the sides and the front and the back, like, blind spot detectors, you name it. There's sensors everywhere. But what is the problem with this type of sensing technology? Okay, so, oh yeah, here's the LiDAR view. Isn't that cool? Like the LiDAR basically can say it carves out a silhouette of a person, a stoplight, a car at the other side of the intersection, so on and so forth. But the problem is, it's all line of sight, right? It'll go as far as, let's say, the first solid surface, but can it go past that? Can it go beyond, let's say, the horizon? Can it go around the corner of a building? No, these technologies are going to more or less, for the most part, stop at like the first sort of like physical entity and say, that's it, I can't penetrate any further. That's the limitation of my situational awareness. It might be sufficient in a lot of cases, but you want these vehicles to drive as well or even better as a human driver, right? And so, our computer, I'm still hoping it's a little bit faster than that. You use the processing on a self-driving car. But, where is that sort of like, game changer that makes this vehicle go to the next level? And the answer is you need to give it a sixth sense that us human drivers, unless we became telepathic, don't have, okay? And that's the wireless connectivity angle. So basically, the connected vehicle perspective from a self-driving car, which has been a catalyst, okay, really making this sort of like these intelligent vehicles get off the ground and such and drive around, and then everything that surrounds us, like the Internet of Things on the road, okay, in the bridges, everywhere, okay, is being spurred on by the promise of these things like the self-driving technology. And again, like the motivation, number one is safety, right? Because self-driving cars really, the thing about them is like if you program into it, let's say the rules of the road, like this is legislation, these are like the regulations for driving on a road in, let's say, the state of Massachusetts, okay, or the state of Florida or the state of Illinois, and how you stop, how you go into a rotary. Oh, I love rotaries. Don't get me started about rotaries, and so on and so forth. Okay, they will follow it, right? They'll sense the information around the environment, and they're going to follow it, right? It's kind of cool because you talk with some of the self-driving car companies out there and you ask, okay, how many times have they been in accidents? And they'll be in a few accidents, right? How many times has it been their fault? Very few, because the vehicles are programmed in such a way that they'll follow the rules, even if, let's say, you don't. And it'll always end up that the other person will be considered at fault, okay, for that collision, that incident, okay? So, but in general, it's also not going to do anything risky, like running red lights, running yellow lights. Of course, they're going to be yellow all the way when you go through that like huge intersection. So that's the thing. Like, there's a body count. There's a huge body count in fatalities every year in the United States. And that can be drastically reduced if we put in technology that really doesn't, like, it takes out the human error factor, which is causing most of these fatalities. Okay, so the issue is that line of sight, right? Like the radar, the vision system, the LiDAR, it'll only go as far until the first obstruction. And then, you know, that's it. Maybe you can do some sort of machine learning to kind of predict based on the surrounding environment if new things are going to come in and out. But otherwise, you're going to be blindsided until you can see it, okay? Until it has direct kind of like a physical access to the sensor that's going to detect it and give that additional situational information to the self-driving car. So that's where the wireless connectivity. Oh, there's that image again. This is off of exit 6. That's like, I think, Sterling and Leominster, Massachusetts. So my parents-in-law just live like, you know, near here. So what happens is wireless connectivity, well, depends what type of frequency you're operating at, but wireless frequencies, if you choose like ultra high frequency, UHF and in that ballpark, right? It's like, oh, okay, there's a building there. Oh, no problem. Like the wireless signal will still propagate around it. It might not be line of sight, and there might be wireless impairments, right? Like the environment might corrupt the wireless signal. But hey, it doesn't matter because you have an entire community of wireless researchers and engineers like me who I've spent all my research life looking at how to make a better wireless radio, okay? And you have other folks, you have generations of folks who have optimized these communication systems. Heck, in Chicago, there was a wireless company there once that's like, you know, it was a small one. Its name began with M. You know, come on. Like, you know, like the wireless sector of the world is huge, right? So we know how to do wireless. Now, take that technology, apply it to the road, and give those cars the sixth sense. Now you've turned wireless connectivity into an additional form of sensing technology, right? Collecting this information. So what happens is, like, you know, vehicles around the corner, trying to see what's happening 3 blocks down the way, getting situational awareness information of traffic surrounding you all the way to your destination. That's all possible with the wireless connectivity. And then even things like vehicle-to-vehicle communications, like the use case I'm going to be talking about at the end of the presentation, is going to be really, really interesting because now you can do self-driving vehicles. No, not only that, self-driving vehicles that can drive in formation to be environmentally friendly by reducing by improving the aerodynamics of multiple vehicles traveling in such a way that one vehicle has the air resistance, but all the other vehicles are in its slipstream, therefore using less fuel, right? And then, of course, being able to interoperate with each other as well as around human-operated vehicles, because self-driving cars are not just going to like poof, come on the road, and human-operated vehicles are going to poof, disappear. There's going to be a huge coexistence issue. It's going to be fun. Oh boy. So they're going to need to talk. Oh, they're going to need to talk. All right. And then there's this thing, oh, I love this term, vehicular Internet of Things. So when you think of Internet of Things, you think of going to your hardware store, where before the pandemic, I would hang out for hours checking out the latest like drywalling material or the latest selection of hammers or something like that. And then you'll see Internet of Things, thermostats and stuff. Yeah, but you could also have Internet of Things where the vehicles and the infrastructure all talk with each other, okay, to again enhance that situational awareness. And these vehicles are essentially doing all this decision making, all this data processing. It's collecting information, it's processing information, it's deciding what to do, and then it's executing. So it's fantastic. And it's sharing its information with others as well, so that they have information to make decisions too. So this is an example of how like self-driving cars and wireless connectivities works. Like for instance, this actually appeared in a VTC. In fact, it was the VTC in Chicago. Great conference. It was an awesome conference. And what ends up happening is you have vehicles, and suppose one of the more dangerous maneuvers you can do on a road, especially like a highway, is lane changing. And you say, well, what? Lane changing? Yes, because it's one thing if you stay in your own lane, but it's another thing. It's like, okay, I'm going to get out of this lane, go into a faster lane, maneuver around the slower vehicle, and then pass it and then go in. And at the same time, obey the speed limit and not cause a collision. I have to pay attention to the environment around me. You're beginning to see this is a little bit of a complicated maneuver, right? When I was learning to drive, that always freaked me out, right? So what happens is there's a lot of information exchange that needs to be happening. You need to inform car 3 here, hey, I'm about to go in front of you. And maybe car 3 is going 10 miles per hour faster than you are. So you need to know how much faster you need to pick up, and also go in a sequence that you avoid rear-ending car 2. Oh, by the way, you know those slow cars are in the left lane? Car 4 is that car. So how do you also negotiate with car 4? So now you got this like song and dance. It almost looks like ballet. It's like, okay, exchange partner there and go here. And try and do that only with sensors alone. It's possible, but now put a snowstorm in it. Not really all that fun, right? You increase, you know, I don't want to call it fog of war, but you create a higher probability of some sort of corner case, some risk, like, you know, sort of failure mode to take hold and cause potentially fatalities. So connectivity really tries to minimize a failure mode from coming in by getting as much information about the environment around you. Okay. And so, and things like that, like even things like virtual stoplights, right? Like, you know, imagine like you have the environment around you providing information to the vehicles and vice versa. So now you have this, like I like to call it, a connected vehicle ecosystem. Cars with cars, cars with infrastructure, infrastructure. They all communicate with each other to make a safe and enjoyable driving experience that's also potentially environmentally more friendly, right? And also you get from point A to point B faster, more efficiently. Okay, and this is whenever people say, well, yeah, just you know, connect the vehicles, use Wi-Fi. No, because the thing is, like, try and use Wi-Fi. So what's the thing about Wi-Fi? Okay, well, I put in my classroom, you know, 50 students can connect to it, maybe, sort of, right? And not a very heavy data rates either. Well, now look at this situation. That's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 lanes, this stretch of road, that's like, I don't know how many hundreds of feet. Wireless can definitely cover it all, but you now run into this issue that you don't have enough wireless channels to support all the communications that's going on, right? So the car in front of me talks with the car in front of it. Oh, and then that car is also talking with the car inside of it. It's like, imagine a crowded auditorium and everybody's talking, okay? That's what your wireless spectrum, your wireless environment looks like. No one's going to be able to hear anything. And if you're trusting the wireless connectivity with mission critical systems, you're in trouble, okay? So that's why it's critical that what we do here is we find ways of securing reliable wireless channels to support connected vehicles, okay? So that's where the vehicular spectrum scarcity issue comes in, okay? So warning, I'm going to be talking about Massachusetts roads for a few minutes. So any of you who have driven in Massachusetts, you know what I mean in terms of like the mass driver, right? It's an interesting, oh, Q&A. I'm going to answer this, okay? Would we need a giant PKI system to ensure trust? Yes, good question. So question here is this is good. If you have a few questions along, it might like extend my presentation, but hey, I like my adrenaline's this high. So absolutely, like you know, you really absolutely need to build in some sort of security, because if you have bad actors feeding fraudulent data about their location, hey, the light is green up ahead, don't worry about it when in fact it's red, you absolutely believe it. Like you should, there are most definitely going to be hackers. There are going to be people who will actively try to compromise the safety of the driving experience. So that's I don't want to say that's the next level up, because you could also do a lot of disastrous things if, say, you actively jam the frequency, right? So it's not that difficult to jam wireless channels. Now, that's super illegal. Like if you're found out, and there are ways of doing that if you use, like, you know, so folks like the FCC and similar organizations use things like direction finding. So if you're emitting and you're jamming people and stuff, they'll triangulate your location. And then, you know, I think they do have, like, I don't know anything about law enforcement, but I have a feeling they might have the ability to to either press charges or I'm not a lawyer, but I would say bad things happen if you're caught trying to jam actively systems that are trying to protect people's lives on the road. But that's a great question. And that's a huge research question. And then how you do that reliably, building in trust into all these vehicles. So great question. So some folks say as an answer, shucks, use sort of a closed cellular network that has to be authenticated. You're a cellular user or your vehicle is a cellular user, and you do something like CV2X, right? But then what happens if someone hijacks or mimics, or they do like a man-in-the-middle attack and makes themselves look like you on the road and feeds out fraudulent? So it's beginning to become like a cat and mouse game. But that's a great question. Oh my God, I could talk about that forever. But that's a great question. Oh, awesome. So the spectrum scarcity. Okay, so there's this trick, okay, that the wireless people have been playing with since the 2000s, which is called dynamic spectrum access. So it's basically, think of it as like when there's opportunity, when in chaos, there's opportunity. Well, if let's say the wireless spectrum, if let's say there's licensed spectrum and the license holder is not using all that spectrum, and there are usable portions of it, even if it's like, for a few minutes and stuff, take advantage of it. So it's essentially, it's like you're opportunistically seeking out available wireless channel bandwidth. You're communicating your information as long as you're not interfering with the licensed users of that spectrum. And then when that band begins becoming used by the license holder, you get out, you find now another frequency channel to communicate across, right? And you might say, well, how's that practical? Because what ends up happening is if I'm going to get kicked out because a licensed user begins using that spectrum I was using, well, that's kind of irritating. Then I have to move all my communication operation to another frequency band. You're right. But there are techniques. First of all, there is a combination of frequency channels. And I'm going to be talking about one of them where the licensed user, there's usually just, this one has one only, is super predictable. It's like the tortoise in terms of like the variability of this environment, if at all. So ideal, super ideal, with nice portions of frequency bandwidth that are available in a lot of cases, and at a nice low enough frequency that the propagation characteristics are awesome. Like you can quote me, awesome. Right. Other frequency bands are kind of like a rat's nest, right? It's like they're on, they're off, they're all over the place, very variable. I wouldn't go there first. It's possible probably to communicate across it, but it's going to require a lot of crazy signal processing and a lot of machine learning in order to track that variability. Okay. So the idea is in a vehicular dynamic spectrum access is that the cars are going to seek out empty wireless channels between them and communicate the information that they need to share with everybody else about their situation. So what happens is a vehicle, let's say vehicle A needs to do onboard decision making. What it's going to do is it's going to collect information from vehicle B. It's also going to collect information from vehicle D, who also is getting information from vehicle C along the way. So what happens is this entire network of vehicles are all seeking out. So in the top, you see that's versus the x-axis is frequency. Each one of those trapezoidal looking things is a wireless channel, right? Gray means the wireless channel. This is the licensed or primary transmission. You can't touch those. Those have incumbent rights, not allowed. But where the red, the blue, and the green trapezoids are, those are our vehicular communications that are able to kind of squeeze in the empty spots between the primary transmissions. And so that's called VDSA. And what we did, okay, first step, so we were sponsored by Toyota, okay, to find out saying, hey, what about digital television spectrum? That's a good spectrum. It's like from 400-ish megahertz to 800-ish megahertz. The TV channels are pretty much on all the time, but they don't move. They don't go off, on, they move here and there. So if they're on, they're on, and if they're off, they're off. So extremely predictable. And a nice frequency band too, great propagation characteristics. Why not? So they asked us, the thing is, TV towers though, like when you drive from one place, you might be driving away from one TV tower, but you might be getting closer to another one. So TV signals, they travel like, they travel, how can I put it? About 40 miles. If they like, if your over-the-air TV set is 40 miles or less away from a TV tower, plus your TV set has a preamplifier, you'll be able to pick up a TV signal. But then any further and the signal becomes very weak and unusable, perfect. So that means like if let's say it's unusable, it's below the noise floor, one can take advantage of that spectrum for your vehicular communications. But now here's the quandary. What happens is as you're driving, you're not staying still. You might be getting closer, closing that 40 miles and closer gap with that TV tower. And oh, now I need to get out of that channel. But how realistic is it? So what we did is we drove all 134 miles of I-90 in Massachusetts, okay? From Boston to the border of New York State. And we were taking measurements of those digital television channels. So those little pin drops indicate every place along the way that we did those measurements, signal strength measurements of TV channels all along Massachusetts. And it was a nice road trip, lots of great measurements. So this is what, at the end of the day, your spectrum looks like. So it looks like modern art, but it also what it is reflects, okay, the amount, I forgot, like these are the power constraints, okay? So what happens is, what these things mean, okay, is like in terms of dB, okay, what's interesting is in the United States, the television channels are 6 megahertz wide. They're beautiful rectangular spectral shapes. They have a pilot tone on one side, but let's forget about that. But they're 6 megahertz wide. So you might wonder, all these strips, they're all standardized and stuff. Correct. They're all 6 megahertz wide, right? So you go from 470 almost to 800 megahertz, right? That's where digital television used to exist, at least in 2010 in the United States. And what happens is you go from Boston, Newton, Framingham, Westboro, Auburn, Sturbridge, Palmer, Chicopee, Blanchford, West Beckett, Lee, West Stockbridge. Okay, so we're going from east. So the bottom is the eastmost, like basically Boston. You can't get further east than that. You're going to the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the border at West Stockbridge with New York State. And what you'll see, okay, is you begin seeing like these, like more red and less blue. So what ends up happening, what these things mean is, I'm trying to remember, it's because, yeah, it's kind of the inverse. Maybe next time I'll use a different color scheme. So blue means that like this is the tolerance. If you were to communicate, you cannot exceed, okay, this minus 60 dBm threshold, because any higher, you now exceed your limit in terms of interfering with an active digital digital TV channel, okay? Red, on the other hand, means like you're well above 0 dBm, means like there's basically nobody present in this very deep red region here, as well as here, which means you could transmit at a pretty high power level with your other fellow vehicles on the road. So what this map shows is the various levels of tolerance that you can communicate, okay, across digital television channels at various signal strengths on the road while not interfering with them, all right? And then we had a bunch of publications, actually quite a few publications from that research. Now, that research with Toyota says, this is what the landscape, this tells you what you can and cannot do, but it doesn't say how to do it. So that's where our friends, the Bumblebees, come in. So Bumblebees are really cute. Luckily, I didn't have to deal with the Bumblebees. We collaborated with some biology collaborators here. They're pretty awesome, like Professor Rob Giguere, who's now at UMass Dartmouth, and Professor Liz Ryder, who is here at WPI. Both of them really cool biology folks. So they're into something called like behavioral biology. So how animals behave in their natural environments, and in particular, how their brains are optimized to survive, right? And so the type of research they do, first of all, it took a long while for biologists and electrical engineers to talk, because even something as simple as sampling, I have a very specific definition of sampling. coming from the digital signal processing world, right? Like take a sample of that signal, another sample, another sample, another sample through an analog to digital converter. Their sampling is quite different because of like, taking like sampling in terms of like from the environment, like resources, like nectar, like this little bumblebee is doing here. These little colorful things, this is how they emulate flowers in the lab. So they have this cage, they put the bumblebees in there, they have flowers, and what's special about it, this is how they engineer things, okay? Because there is method to the madness of, let's say, bumblebees and their foraging. Blue flowers have a lot of nectar, yellow flowers have little nectar, and orange flowers have so-so nectar. And they want to see how that bumblebee, how quickly it learns to say, I get the most reward, expend the least amount of energy and with respect to getting the blue flower. Therefore, my probability of survival is the highest. If I go to the yellow flower, my probability of survival goes way down, right? And they want to see how that bumblebee makes that determination. And a number of factors kick in, including how it learns and how it remembers, its memory, okay? So what we did is we came up with this paper, this technique where we drew parallels between the two worlds. So the first, okay, in the bumblebee world is how they forage, right? They go around, bzz, 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 they collect nectar levels from they sample flowers and they say how good or how poor it is. White flowers suck, yellow flowers okay, red flowers awesome, purple flowers okay. And then with that information, well, let's say actually white flowers are supposed to be good. It's only going to go after white flowers. Bumblebees will go after white flowers. Same thing can be said about other social animals like honeybees and ants, right? But bumblebees are different because bumblebees are socially independent animals. So like whereas socially dependent animals like ant colonies and honeybees, like even if a much better option presents itself to the honeybee, but the hive told me that white flowers are good, so I'm going to go after white flowers, and it will not explore otherwise, okay? So what happens is because of that like very strict and orderly process, after a while it doesn't really scale well or is as flexible, okay, in a varying environment, as opposed to bumblebees where they're a little bit more independent. It's like, bzz, 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 white flowers, that red flower looks good, and samples it. It sucked before about yesterday, but today red flowers are actually full of nectar. So then it readjusts and says, I'm going to go after red flowers instead, right? So that's the same philosophy we're doing with respect to sampling wireless channels. Because wireless channels, remember, like some wireless channels are very dynamic, lots of activity, and others nobody's using whatsoever. Think of it like flowers, right? The very dynamic or almost always occupied wireless channel, why should I even bother going after it? My reward's very little. I'm not going to get my information across. I'm going to sense and find those channels that are almost never occupied because I know I'm not going to be kicked out, and I'm going to communicate my information. And that's exactly what we do. And from time to time, my vehicular radio is going to check out the channels again, see if the occupancy statistics change. And if they do, it's going to learn, it's going to adapt, and it's going to move to a better channel to increase, to maximize its survival, its ability to communicate information. Okay? So that's how in this environment, what we end up doing is we have these vehicles and they're all vying for those precious wireless channels, because you saw that wonderful 10-lane highway scenario, a lot of cars, but spectrum's finite, right? So we're going to have to optimize in order for every vehicle to be able to have that type of spectrum. And someone might say, well, what about 5.9 gigahertz? Yeah, 5.9 gigahertz is great. All 75 megahertz of it, that's not a lot of bandwidth, right? Like, especially if you want to go higher, if you want to do more than just send out basic service set messages and such, like, BSMs. What's going to happen is you're going to run out of bandwidth very quickly if you want to communicate things like telemetry information or more sensing information and share it with your other vehicles. So, you might have to have like a 2-tier system, essential communications and overhead communications on the 75 megahertz only, And then, more sort of like bandwidth intensive comms on, like, let's say out of that. So with that, what happens is we came up with some definitions. This is kind of like our translator, if you will, between the biology world and the communications world. So things like channel is a floral species, channel sensing, bumblebee foraging. And we keep on going and going and going. Like, channel activity over time, floral species occupancy over time. And this allowed the biology people and us electrical engineering people to talk. And it's great. Like, interdisciplinary research is so cool. And this algorithm basically is essentially, in a nutshell, it says, Bumblebee goes around, we initialize the model, and it discovers a flower. Has it been visited? Has that flower type, red, yellow, white, been visited before? Yes, update the memory if anything has changed in its nectar level. No, start learning about it. Okay. And then what happens is, does it have enough nectar to meet or exceed the threshold for harvesting? Yes, no. No, go back to the beginning, find another flower type. If yes, harvest and you're done. You're good. Like, you're plenty, go back to the hive, survive, and, prepare for the winter, because I heard in Chicago, the winters are a little cold. So, but the main thing in the vehicular world that you really, really want to avoid is that switching. You really want to avoid, like, a car saying, hey, let's change to this channel. Oh, now we want to change here. Now we don't want, because unlike, let's say, slightly nomadic or stationary communications, like walking around a campus, cars travel fast, right? And the environment changes fast. So if there's, like, let's say that car suddenly braked, it's like, and you're midway through switching to another channel, you just increase the probability of an accident. So you really want to minimize as much as possible. You want to choose those channels that are least likely, that they're most likely you can communicate on, but without having to switch constantly. Okay. And this graph here, we did simulations for both a highway environment, super fast, and urban. So urban is kind of tricky because it's not as fast. Well, it depends which urban environment you drive in. Just kidding. But what happens is it's very dynamic. Car pulls out a parking spot. Now this truck comes out. Oh, double parking. Ugh, this is frustrating. So very dynamic, as opposed to highway, which you hope, again, depends on which state you live in, is like, it's fast. It's very fast. But it's like everyone kind of travels hopefully in the same direction, and you don't have people kind of pulling out of a parking spot on a highway. So what happens is, what we see is that in a highway environment, sure, there is a switching cost, but it's nominal. It's okay. But in an urban environment, to change channels with all that pandemonium around you, it's pretty serious stuff. You really, really want to stay on the same channel as long as possible, because you don't want for an instant to, in a manner of speaking, in the spectrum world, you don't want to blink. Okay. So, and then there are things like the probability of channels being in a busy state, because that's actually bad news too. If you don't have access to that channel, your lifeline is going to be at 75 megahertz only. And you're going to lose out on a lot of that cool situational information, situational awareness information, which, if you have an autonomous vehicle, a self-driving car, could be super duper important. All right. So we actually took this right before the pandemic. Okay, my grad student, what he did, really awesome. He built a CV2X testbed. We presented this at VTC 2020 spring. Okay, it was a virtual one, and we implemented CV2X, 2 radios using a PC5 connection, and we built in the Bumblebee-based VDSA algorithm and tested it out. Okay. Just to have some hardware. And here's a nice photograph, because every communication person that builds hardware has to have one of these photos showing that, yeah, we did build it. And it worked great. The paper is actually on IEEE Explorer. But this was a cool setup. This kind of verified once and for all, taking the VDSA Bumblebee-inspired approach and putting it into actual radio hardware. And we did. Okay. And this is what we got in terms of things like, for instance, latency, because in the automotive communications world, latency is death. So we try and, as much as possible, when we have channel bandwidths of 5 megahertz and 10 megahertz. And you might say, well, why is latency going up and everything? Well, if you take 10 megahertz bandwidth, you're using twice as much bandwidth. And now there are going to be issues in terms of like, the number of channels available in order to access, especially more vehicles you have on the road, right? So what we did is we just, so what happens is this Bumblebee-inspired foraging and the VDSA really now whittles down to a resource optimization. And when you have larger bandwidths, you have fewer resources theoretically that you can divide amongst all the vehicles. Okay, and here's a bunch of papers that we published. So lastly, vehicular beamforming. Well, beamforming is really cool because you can do some really funky stuff with electromagnetics. And one of those things is called beamforming. Yeah, and it literally, that's what the name is. You may say beamforming. You form electromagnetic beams. So if you have, let's say, multiple antennas, you can play around with them electromagnetically. You can send the same information on them, bloop, 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 bloop. But if you change the electromagnetic properties of each of the signals, they destructively or constructively combine. When they constructively combine, it's a big focused blast of energy in a specific direction and not really anywhere else. That's very attractive. Remember that like 10 lanes of traffic, what that means is I can project a beam to the car I want to talk with, okay? But then somewhere over there, I'm in lane 8, lane 2 and 3, 2 other cars can use the same frequency. They do beamforming, and I'll never hear them, and they'll never hear me because all our energies are focused in beams. So it's very attractive. There's a lot of potential. There's a problem, though. I need to know where my intended receiving vehicle is. Otherwise, me beamforming out into space without knowing where to point the beam is a problem. So this is what beamforming looks like. The gray pattern, that's how, like, at least I would illustrate the electromagnetic projection of my signal, like in one direction. Imagine like my car all of a sudden sends an energy blast. Like if this was like some sort of like superheroes movie, imagine I bring my hands together and like lightning comes out. But in reality, beamforming is invisible, but very powerful. So these two vehicles here, this yellow car and that yellow car, one beamforms to the other one knows where it's expecting that transmission and beamforms back, so that what beamforming does on the receive mode is how you focus your ears in one direction and you ignore all the other interference around you. And those interferers could be these blue cars here. For some oddball reason in this diagram here, everybody's driving a station wagon, I think. So what ends up happening is, like, by beamforming, you minimize interference being received by other vehicles, and you minimize you being an interferer to other vehicles. So fantastic, fantastic. So, and then here's some math on how to do beamforming. But the problem is, if you're depending on GPS information to know where your target is, GPS is not super accurate. Well, okay, GPS is accurate, right? But it still has some error. And if these beams are highly focused, this is a huge problem. Huge problem. So like, you know, I think you're there. No, I'm over there. But what happens is, look how that projection of energy misses. You're already sending almost no information to the green car where you're trying to transmit to. So you're in trouble. So it's like you completely missed your target. They're not getting that safety information or any sort of telemetry information or any information whatsoever about like, let's say, what your driving status is or something like that. A question. So the Bumblebee algorithm seems greedy. Yeah, I would say that. Like, I mean, I would say there is some greedy aspects to it. Yeah, so okay, so the question is, the Bumblebee algorithm seems to be greedy. Would using Q-learning to take some future discounted costs into account help a bit? I mean, there's a number of factors, like, right, so I mean, you could apply some sort of prediction algorithms to look into the future. I mean, you could definitely do that. And in fact, I mean, that's from a biology perspective, like us collaborating with them. Like we introduced some stuff to them, like for instance, like we didn't quite use Q learning, but we just used like simple Kalman filtering in order to do some simple prediction. And we said this, oh yeah, like, you know, the biologist, like, what are you doing? And we're doing prediction. How? Oh, we're using Kalman filtering. What's that? And that's where that interdisciplinarity comes in. But yeah, and the thing is, what's kind of an interesting question that then nudged them is, do you think the bumblebees can predict? Right? So now they will go into their lab with their bumblebees and see if they have any of those like predictive elements in them. But that's a good question. Like, so, I mean, the bumblebee is a starting point and you can build upon it like the Q learning. You can try other sort of models in order to optimize as well as, like, you know, so it's not the be all that ends all, but that's a really good point. So absolutely. Absolutely. I think like human minds, they're a little bit more sophisticated. We do prediction, right? It's like, I think based on the trends on what I've observed in the environment, that the white flowers, they suck right now in terms of nectar level, but they're progressively getting better. I'm going to predict that in a few days, the white flowers are going to be better, right? So you could totally do that. So humans can do that. Bumblebees, we don't know. That's a great question. Good question. All right. So what happens is with GPS error calculation, this is actually well studied as well. So things like, for instance, dilution of precision, and then there's something called user equivalent range error, URI. And so what happens is there are ways of calculating in a fuzzy way what approximately, like, how much error are we expecting from like getting a GPS location from another vehicle? Like, are they here? Are they here? Are they here? Are they here? Correct? So with that in mind, what we did is we explored when we had separation distances of the transmitter receiver from -500 to 500. Obviously, when they're really, really close, you know, and with different numbers of antennas for the beam forming, of course, we're going to get the best SNR. And as we go farther away, well, we get worse SNR because of, like, you know, the beam forming mismatch due to the GPS error. Okay. And then, of course, SNR is not by itself. It feeds into things like the bit error rate, right? And again, we'll see what happens with respect to so this is kind of like the inverse waterfall curve, right? So what happens is at a separation distance of 100 meters, well, you're doing great because, you know, there's very little uncertainty where the positions of the two vehicles are. If you say, oh, I'm here at this coordinate, oh, I'm here at that coordinate. But the farther away you are you really at that coordinate? Or is it kind of fuzzy, right? And then, of course, the other thing is interference. And this is a constant ongoing issue because even under the best of circumstances, beamforming is not perfectly interference mitigating. It will allow some signals to go through. And especially if your interferer is beamforming, it's projecting almost all its energy against you, unintentionally, of course. Of course, if you're an attacker, you know, beamforming can be a very powerful tool as well. It will interfere. So imagine you don't have a precise down to the centimeter location of where your vehicle is, plus you throw in interference, and this makes for a very exciting series of PhD dissertation topics and hopefully funding to come with it to explore and find the answer to that. So again, what happens is the BER results, as you have a moving vehicle, that hump here is when that interferer vehicle is almost like right next to you when you're trying to establish a communication link between a transmit and a receive vehicle, okay? And 4, 8, and 16 antennas, okay? Why is this significant? 4, 8, 16 antennas. The more antennas you have, the finer, the more narrower, the more focused your beam is, right? If you have 2 antennas, it's like that half of the car or that half of the car. But 16 antennas, you're going to get like pencil beams almost. Like imagine your energy is going to be like you can't even see it, but it's going in one point. Okay, and we have some papers on that as well. Now, use case. So platooning, platooning. So folks love platooning because especially of like the aerodynamic properties. The first car is going to obviously have a lot air resistant and expend a lot of fuel in order to take care of it. But the other 3 cars, if it's close enough, and that's the scary part, is the close enough part. If they're really close and driving in a self-driving manner, What happens is those other 3 cars are not going to expend all that much fuel. They're just going to hang out in the slipstream. But that requires a lot of communications amongst the platoons, and that is where we use the digital television spectrum in order to form those wireless links. Okay, and DTT means it's a digital TV transmitter, right? So you have digital TV transmitters and digital TV receivers. The bad thing is, here's the thing: when we're transmitting in television spectrum, right? And we're saying, oh, we shouldn't interfere with the digital TV tower, right? Those huge, like 1,500-foot tall towers and such. It's not the towers you should be worried about, right? They're transmitting. It's the TV sets that you're jamming, right? So when you talk, so who's the primary user? Who's the licensed user of the digital television spectrum? Sure, the TV towers are broadcasting. It's every one of those over-the-air television sets. Those are primary users. And the bad problem is they don't tell you that you're jamming with them. It's going to be the human watching TV saying, ugh, this stupid TV, it's not working again, right? So we have to come up with ingenious ways of avoiding that. So what we did this collaborative paper with several friends of mine at Potsdam University of Technology, one of which is actually here right now in the US on a Fulbright fellowship, studying with us about continuing this research. Actually, it's pretty cool, plus with some systems engineering. And what we did is we actually looked at like we did some measurement experiments with respect to TV spectrum at 490 gigahertz and at 522 megahertz. And what we did is we tried to find out, like, we have the DT, the measurements were collected in Europe. So that's why it's like digital video broadcast terrestrial. So I think that's an ETSI standard. Whereas in the US, we don't do DVB-T, okay? So as a result, what happens is they made these approximations in terms of the white space behavior, and then see from that if we can take advantage of the spectrum in order to communicate our signals. And what we did is we played around with things like, for instance, like, you just have like your, what the heck is it? So what happens is we just use sort of a basic algorithm between the vehicles. Then what happens is we have the basic algorithm, the control channel. Yeah, the control channel, then a control channel with television spectrum with no switching in the television spectrum, a control channel and a television spectrum with a Bumblebee algorithm with 0 dB cost and 3 dB, then 6 dB cost. And that's kind of a back off, right? So what happens is our Bumblebee algorithm can be very aggressive, or it could be very laid back. In terms of how it goes after digital television spectrum, because as you notice with these measurements and such, okay, these are the average power levels because the environment is changing rapidly relative to the vehicle, because the vehicle is moving, but the receivers on the vehicle, right, it's fluctuating all over the place, okay, and you also have digital televisions everywhere, right? We have to be very mindful about these fluctuating signal levels, right? So how aggressive do you want to use that channel when it's available if it goes below that threshold for reception? Because if it's below, then we can do exactly like the Massachusetts measurements, okay, and transmit. But if it's above, like that television signal is above that threshold, which means it is on the air, we can't touch it. And this is our first paper, and obviously this is a work in progress, and we're very excited, rah, rah, rah. So expect more great work from all these folks. So yeah, and I thought I had a difficult name to pronounce, but all right. So that's my talk. As Alvin said, if you have any questions or anything, this is my email address, alexw@wpi.edu. I think I made a smart choice, because if it was Wyglinski@wpi.edu, I probably wouldn't get half the emails and stuff, because a lot of people mix up the Y for an I and the I for a Y. I don't know why, but that's why. So with that, thank you everyone for your time. I really appreciate it. You've all been great. I'll be very happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Alex, for that wonderful presentation, and talking about bumblebees, and so now I want to get some honey to kind of
Oh my God,
add
yeah.
tea with. But anyway, so Kevin, are there any questions that we have?
Yeah, I think I know I have a few questions that I have noted here, and I guess for everybody, all attendees on the call, if you would like to go through and submit any questions, please feel free to do that now, and we'll kind of start working through the list. So I guess one question that I had is, how do you see the open source community kind of moving in to support connected and automated vehicle development in the future, focusing on connectivity side?
That's open source. So the thing is, my PhD student, and actually it doesn't take even a PhD student. I have quite a few undergraduate students have done this. What they did is these radios, they run, well, these radios are peripheral. So they connect by either gigabit Ethernet or some other sort of high-speed connection to a workstation or a server that, let's say it's running Linux, but there's like several open source projects out there that implement things like LTE. So in this case, there's one that's like open air interface, OAI, that's put out by Eurocom, and that religiously implements LTE pretty well. So that's exactly, so that like 100% down to a T is wonderful in terms of that's something that I've always been like more and more my team, like instead of saying, oh, we'll pretend to make a LTE base station. No, we make a LTE base station. Now, the problem is, we don't have the license, like, that's software is optimized to LTE bandwidths, right? Or sorry, carrier frequencies, which we don't have the licenses for. So you'll have to be very careful. In this case, what CoolDeep did, we connected it, hardwired it in. So, and we put an attenuator so we don't destroy the radio. But yeah, open source. So for this, absolutely. Now, on the vehicle side, that's a different story. So like I'm there, it's kind of always a fun battle. Like Massachusetts had on its ballot last November the right to repair with respect to the access to to your data, to your vehicle. Because I think what happened is there was like a loophole or something where initially you did have, but I think there was something about like electronic data, something in this format wasn't eligible or was not included. So this was kind of a patch to fix that. But, and there was quite a bit of resistance to that. Like there were various entities at play. But yeah, I mean, that seems like a little bit more of an uphill battle. From the wireless side, a lot of folks are moving towards open source. There's even things called ORAN, like Open Radio Access Networks, which people think, like instead of this company building this box, this box, this box, this box, this box for 5G and have vendor lock. So, you want to buy that base station from company XYZ? Oh, but you need to buy the server and you need to buy the router and you need to buy all those interconnects also from the same vendor. What happens is ORAN throws that all the window. It's mixed, it's a buffet. Oh, I think that's the most suitable for my needs, this, and this, and you stitch it all together. And that's also going to create innovation in the wireless world. So yeah, rah, open source.
Yeah. I always like hearing that personally. So that's good to know. That's
rah, or open source.
The open rah, open source. Yes, yeah.
I could see that in Twitter, like hashtag rah, open source.
All right, so another question is, how do you see some of the impacts, or what do you see as the impacts to connectivity from last fall's FCC decision to open 5.9 gigahertz for CV2X? I think you've kind of mentioned some solutions possibly to that through this discussion, but looping back directly to that question, what do you? Yeah,
I mean, the thing is that I think as soon as there was a technology that okay, so like the thing is, I also have done a lot of work with IEEE 802.11p, and don't get me wrong, I really do like IEEE 802.11p. I wonder why IEEE, no, but the thing is, CV2X, especially with like the PC5 side channel, is quite powerful. There are still some issues. I think like the latency is one. Like, like I think the thing is, what's really critical is always trimming down latency as much as possible, because latency is death. But I think the decision to do that, I think, is really important. I would have liked if like they opened more bandwidth for vehicle communications, but I guess the premise is that 75 megahertz is for like mission critical communications between vehicles, right? And then with respect to, let's say, more superfluous communications, like you do have now this nearly, well, no, is it nearly 2 gigahertz worth of unlicensed spectrum from starting around 5.1 all the way to 7.125 gigahertz to do unlicensed access. So if you want to do more vehicle comms, but you need to coexist with other folks, there you go. But if you have mission critical comms, you at least got 75 megahertz of dedicated vehicle spectrum. Now the choice of technology, you don't have like the 802.11p only, now you have the CV2X as well. So, I think the thing is like now the two have got to coexist together. And it's sad because I think the adoption of 802.11p wasn't super great. People talked about it and talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And then, hey, maybe we're going to do connectivity. And then what happened is when people saw, okay, now there's a market for it, then everybody rushed in and, oh, CV2X and blah, blah, blah. And that was it. So I'm not sure if I answered
the timing of the shift. Things were just starting to get moving with it finally, and then things kind of shifted there at the end.
The celestial bodies, they all aligned. They all aligned.
Once I know we're a little bit over the hour, a little bit past the hour too, so I don't want to keep you too late. Sure. Are there any other questions from attendees like to be brought up?
Yeah, I think there isn't. I don't see, but maybe if I can have to ask a final question before we end for this evening. So I'm sure you know about this, Alex, but with the protocol you created with Bumblebee and platooning and all that kind of stuff that's done in the academic sense, and you've proved that it can work. What about in terms of actually within the actual vehicle? So like taking it to the vehicle manufacturers, how do they kind of like react to this type of work that you have done? And do they see that this could be something that could be actually be implemented? Because one of the challenges, right, is that you can show concepts working, but actually putting it is it feasible to actually be able to integrate it within the actual vehicle itself or so? So any comments on that?
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I think like that paper in VTC last year with the CV2X hardware implementation I just showed with open source, not actually communicating over the air. That's one feasibility implementation, right? Now the thing is, the trick is, again, spectrum. Like the thing is, one of the many hats I wear in terms of my research, like the common theme is always there. It's electromagnetic spectrum. It's electromagnetic spectrum. We are in a super duper, like in terms of star alignment, celestial body alignment. Sure, in the vehicle world, we have this alignment. In the wireless spectrum channel bandwidth thing with FCC and millimeter wave and CBRS and spectrum auctions and stuff, this is a crazy time. And I think it's sad to say, like, COVID is a really horrible thing. It's a disastrous thing. It's like to humanity, right? It's a pandemic. People are dying. One thing it has done is also highlighted we are a networked society. Look at what we're doing now, right? And I think there is so many eyes now looking at how we can use spectrum more efficiently. And also people are beginning to open up their eyes to the fact there are a lot of stakeholders in spectrum. So for instance, the NSF is running this solicitation for funding a single $25 million over 5-year center specializing on wireless spectrum coexistence. And you might say, first of all, 25 mil, that's a lot, right? And the context is they're trying to bring together all the stakeholders, and people like myself have been doing wireless spectrum research in terms of enable coexistence, not only in the vehicle world, but like everywhere, right? And what happens is you don't think about who else is using that spectrum. And one community that's very, very concerned, very like 100% concerned, like angry. It's like that neighbor that's like, oh my God, he's mowing too close to the boundary of the properties. It's the radio astronomers, remote sensing people, weather radar people, because they use the same spectrum, almost close, or even in the 5G bands. And they're going to be like, they're listening to, let's say, stars. You can't tell the star your license on spectrum, go to another spectrum, right? So the thing is, before we can do things like the Bumblebee access, like for 75 megahertz, it doesn't make sense. It's way too small. If, let's say, there's a blessing by the FCC to say, you can optimize your usage of the spectrum. Do you have a technology? Here you go. Here's the Bumblebee algorithm, right? And we've been testing it in a context where we're not interfering, we're respecting people's incumbent rights to the spectrum. But there's so much going on right now. Like I'm part of a team putting in one of these proposals. And I think, as far as I'm aware, I'm guesstimating based on what I'm seeing. I think there's easily at least 20 teams out there in the United States putting in proposals for a $25 million center. This is big news. And the other thing I emphasize to everybody is, like, if you've seen in the news or haven't, so the FCC, the way the United States gives licenses to spectrum is through an auctioning mechanism. The old days was like, okay, you get this spectrum. It's almost like, when the gold rush. Oh, if you put your stake in the ground here, this entire acre is yours for $1, right? And if you find a gajillion dollars of gold underneath, but you paid $1 for it, it's a steal. And if you didn't, well, you just spent $1. What happens is now it's demand driven. How much do you think that spectrum is worth to you? So at the end of the day, the 3-ish gigahertz, the CBRS spectrum, the mid-band, as people talking 5G, those auctions with the FCC concluded, and it raised $82 billion. That's a lot. And the thing is, have you all noticed all the new 5G ads on TV? Get your 5G plan. Get your 5G plan. Everyone's going after that. It's now. Now's go time. And also with the pandemic, remote education, right? Remote healthcare, remote work from home. These things are all picking up, and vehicles are no different. And I think to have reliable self-driving vehicles, you're going to have reliable connectivity. Someone says, oh, but LiDAR is good enough. No, it's not. No, it's not. Good luck with that. No, it's not. So the thing is, if you want a smart vehicle that is thinking multiple steps ahead, not like, oh, immediately I'm okay. You need connectivity. But I'm biased. I'm a connectivity guy.
No, that's very true, because the thing is that I think about, like, there's a video that BMW showed, with their Vision Next 100 vehicle, that shows that as it was, self-driving on the road, it's able to see a cyclist that's behind a truck and know that it is approaching, because the human can't see it, right? Yep. But because you have some type of wireless technology, be able to actually make a notice that there is an actual cyclist actually moving, then it will automatically slow down and stop to let the cyclist go.
And that's the thing. Actually, that's the thing. Like, this other thing about the CV2X, because it used to be under the 4G, and now it's evolving into the 5G standard. If that cyclist has a cell phone, if that pedestrian has a cell phone, if your car connects to the 5G network, that's the thing about 5G. People don't think about it. 5G is this humongous umbrella of stuff. So you have the cellular evolutionary stuff. When people say, I got a 5G phone, doesn't mean it's faster. But then you have millimeter wave. That's crazy fast, but it's very localized. But 5G is also IoT, it's Internet of Things, and it's vehicular connectivity. So it's like everything's in the ecosystem, everything's connected. Now, going back to the question about the hacker and disrupting everything, yeah, I would be very scared, because all you need is a weak device, and IoT are pretty weak. They use lightweight crypto. You go in there, and then you can create your havoc. Of course, I think probably people have thought about that, right? I hope so, to prevent those things, like only the device gets corrupted, but not the network. But I leave that to my security friends.
Okay,
right.
So I think we're way over time, about half an hour almost over time. But thank you for those people that are still here with us to continue listening to us.
Thank you all.
So
Yeah.
anyway, this is it. Yeah, so thank you. We thank again Alex for his wonderful talk. Thank you, Alex, again for coming.
My
Give us
pleasure.
a wonderful talk this evening and for the questions that we had here this evening. If you haven't already, I put the poll, so we would like to know, some feedback regarding about this webinar and how to improve with other particular topics. So if you haven't already, please complete that poll, which you see on your screen. Important thing, this is being recorded, so those that are have registered, you'll get a copy of this recording, as well as the slides that Alex has. So that will be sent to you after the webinar this evening.
It'll be electronically
So
gift
with
wrapped.
that, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Zero. Yes,
Thank you, everyone.
right. Electronic gift wrap.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, Alex, again for your wonderful talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Thank you for
everyone
allowing
for
me to be here.
attending.
Thank you. Thank you.
And,
Yeah,
continue.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
And, yep. And continue staying healthy and safe, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Alvin.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. And thanks, Jiro.
Thanks.
Okay, then. Take care.